The sound of her children's empty stomachs growling in the next room was louder than any storm Sarah Mitchell had ever heard. She pressed her back against the thin wooden wall of their cramped room above Murphy's general store, feeling the splinters catch on her worn dress. Outside, the October wind of 1887 howled through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Arizona, carrying with it the scent of cattle and broken dreams. Her hands trembled as she counted the 3 coins in her palm for the 100th time today. 3 measly coins between her babies and starvation. Emma, barely 4 years old, had asked for bread again this morning, her tiny fingers tugging at Sarah's skirt with the innocence of a child who didn't understand why Mama cried so much lately. Little Thomas, only 2, had stopped asking for anything at all, which frightened Sarah more than his crying ever could. The fever that took her husband Henry 6 months ago had also taken their hope, their savings, and their future. What it left behind was a 24-year-old widow with no family, no money, and 2 children depending on her for everything. Sarah had tried everything respectable first. She'd cleaned floors at the saloon until her knees bled, washed clothes until her fingers cracked and bled, even tried selling the few belongings Henry had left behind. But Redemption Creek was a town where honest work was scarce for women, and even scarcer for women without husbands to vouch for them. The other women in town had stopped acknowledging her weeks ago, crossing the street when they saw her coming, whispering behind gloved hands about the poor Mitchell widow who couldn't keep herself decent. Mrs. Henderson from the church had made it clear that charity was for the deserving poor, not for women who couldn't control their circumstances properly. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that the very people who claimed to follow Christ's teachings were the first to cast stones. Tonight, like every night for the past 2 weeks, Sarah would walk down those wooden stairs, past her sleeping children, and into Murphy's back room, where men paid her enough coins to buy milk and bread for another day. Each step felt like dying a little more, but each coin meant her babies would live a little longer. She had become an expert at disappearing inside her own mind during those moments. Thinking of Emma's laugh when she played with her cornhusk doll, or the way Thomas reached for her with complete trust every morning. These thoughts were her armor against the shame that threatened to drown her. The autumn air bit through her thin shawl as she made her way down Main Street toward Murphy's place. The saloon's amber lights spilled onto the dusty ground, mixing with the sounds of piano music and rough laughter. Cowboys fresh off the trail mingled with local ranch hands, all looking for ways to spend their hard-earned money on whiskey, cards, and company. Sarah had learned to read them quickly. The young ones were often rough, but quick. The older ones sometimes wanted to talk, which was somehow worse because it reminded her that she was still human underneath it all. As she pushed through the batwing doors, the familiar smell of tobacco smoke and cheap perfume hit her like a physical blow. The other women working tonight nodded at her with the kind of weary solidarity that came from shared desperation. Ruby, a redhead from back east, had been kind enough to show Sarah the ropes during her first terrifying night. Lila, older and harder around the edges, had given her practical advice about safety and pricing. They weren't friends exactly, but they understood each other in ways that respectable women never could. Murphy himself, a barrel-chested man with thinning hair and calculating eyes, took his cut from each transaction and pretended not to see the bruises that sometimes marked his girls. He ran a business, he often said, not a charity. Sarah positioned herself at the far end of the bar, away from the loudest groups, but visible enough to catch attention. Her strategy was simple: get through each night one customer at a time, earn enough to feed her children tomorrow, and try not to think beyond that. Planning for the future had become a luxury she couldn't afford. The saloon door swung open again, bringing with it a gust of cold air and a tall figure in a worn leather coat. The man was older than the typical trail hands, maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned to be cautious, scanning the room before choosing a spot at the bar. Something about him was different from the usual customers, though Sarah couldn't put her finger on what exactly. Jake Anderson ordered whiskey but barely touched it, his calloused fingers drumming against the wooden bar as he watched the room through the mirror behind the bottles. 20 years of cowboy life had taught him to observe before acting, to read people the way he read weather patterns on the horizon. What he saw tonight made his chest tighten with recognition. The blonde woman at the far end of the bar wasn't like the others who worked Murphy's place. Her Her posture spoke of someone fighting to maintain dignity in circumstances that stripped it away piece by piece. She held herself with the careful control of a person who had learned that survival sometimes meant swallowing pride. Jake knew that particular brand of desperation because he'd worn it himself once, back when he was young and stupid enough to believe the world owed him something better. The woman's dress was clean but mended in several places, her hair pinned back with the kind of precision that spoke of better times. When a drunk cowhand approached her, Jake watched her face transform into a mask of professional politeness that didn't quite hide the fear underneath. Something about the way she flinched when the man grabbed her arm too roughly made Jake's jaw clench. He'd seen enough hard luck stories in his travels to recognize someone who hadn't chosen this life, so much has been forced into it. After the cowhand stumbled away toward the stairs with one of the other women, Jake found himself walking toward the blonde before he'd consciously decided to move. She looked up as he approached, and he saw her quickly assess him the way prey evaluates a predator. Her eyes were green, he noticed, the color of prairie grass after spring rain, and they held intelligence along with wariness. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of natural beauty that no amount of hard living could completely erase. "Evening," Jake said quietly, removing his hat as his mother had taught him to do in the presence of a lady. The simple gesture seemed to surprise her because her professional smile faltered for just a moment. "You looking for company tonight, mister?" Her voice was soft, cultured even, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. Not local, then. She'd come from somewhere else, probably somewhere better than this. "Name's Jake Anderson," he said, extending his hand. "And you are?" She stared at his outstretched hand as if it might bite her. Men didn't shake hands with women like her, not in places like this. They negotiated prices and services, nothing more. "Sarah," she said finally, not offering her last name. "Smart woman." "Sarah Mitchell," she added after a pause, as if the politeness had been beaten into her years ago and refused to die completely. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Sarah." Jake's voice carried none of the crude familiarity she was used to hearing. "I was wondering if you might join me for supper. There's a table over there that looks quiet enough for conversation." Sarah blinked, certain she'd misunderstood. "Supper?" "Yes, ma'am. Murphy serves a decent stew, and I find myself in need of company for the meal. The kind of company that involves talking, nothing more." He pulled out a chair at a small table near the window, the gesture so unexpected that Sarah almost forgot to breathe. When was the last time a man had pulled out a chair for her? When was the last time anyone had treated her like she deserved basic courtesy? "I don't understand," she said slowly. "What exactly are you paying for?" Jake's eyes met hers directly, and she saw no deception there, only a gentle sincerity that made her chest ache with longing for something she'd thought was lost forever. "Your time and your conversation, Miss Sarah. Nothing more, nothing less. A man gets tired of eating alone, and you look like someone who might have interesting things to say." The offer was so far outside her experience that she didn't know how to respond. In her new reality, men paid for her body, not her thoughts. They wanted her compliance, not her conversation. The idea that someone might value her words, her opinions, her humanity, seemed almost too impossible to believe. "I charge $2, she said, testing him, waiting for him to laugh or negotiate or reveal his true intentions. "That seems fair for a pleasant evening's company," Jake replied without hesitation, placing the money on the table. "Shall we order that stew?" As Sarah slowly took the offered chair, she felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in months, someone was looking at her like she was a person worth knowing rather than a service to be purchased. The feeling was terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected. She had no idea that this cowboy's simple act of kindness would be the first step toward changing everything. The stew arrived steaming hot, filling the space between them with the rich aroma of beef and vegetables that made Sarah's stomach clench with genuine hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal, something that wasn't leftover bread crusts or watery soup stretched to feed 3 people. Jake noticed how she stared at the food before picking up her spoon, the way her hands shook slightly as she brought the first bite to her mouth. He'd seen that look before, in his own reflection during the lean years after his father died and left him with nothing but debts and broken promises. "You mentioned children earlier," Jake said gently, cutting his bread into smaller pieces. "How old are they?" Sarah's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She'd learned not to talk about Emma and Thomas with customers because it reminded everyone involved of exactly why she was here, what was at stake. But something in Jake's tone suggested genuine interest rather than morbid curiosity. "Emma's 4, Thomas just turned 2, she said quietly. "They're sleeping upstairs right now. Emma thinks I work in the kitchen here, helping Murphy cook. She doesn't understand why Mama comes downstairs after she goes to bed." The weight of that lie sat heavy between them. Jake nodded slowly, understanding more than she'd said aloud. "And their father? Died of fever 6 months ago. Henry was a good man, worked hard, but sickness doesn't care about that." Sarah's voice carried the flat tone of someone who'd told this story too many times, to too many people who couldn't help. "Left us with nothing but debts and a town full of people who think a woman alone must have done something to deserve her circumstances." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough frontier towns to know how quickly community support could turn to judgment, especially for women without male protection. "What did you do before?" he asked. "I mean, before all this." "I was a teacher," Sarah said, and for the first time that evening, her voice carried a note of pride. "Back in Kansas, before Henry and I came west. I taught children to read and write, helped them with their numbers. I loved it." She paused, staring into her stew. "Seems like a lifetime ago now. What stopped you from teaching here?" "Redemption Creek already has a schoolteacher, and besides, no decent family would want their children taught by someone like me. Not anymore." The bitterness in her voice was fresh enough to cut. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her face in the lamplight. This woman had been educated, had held a respectable profession, had been someone's wife, and was still someone's mother. The path from schoolteacher to Murphy's back room wasn't one anyone chose willingly. "Tell me about your work," Sarah said suddenly, clearly wanting to shift the conversation away from herself. "What brings a cowboy to Redemption Creek?" Jake's smile was rueful. "Same thing that brings most men out here. Running from something back east, looking for something better out west. Been working ranches for 20 years now. Ever since I was 15 and decided my stepfather's fists weren't worth the roof over my head." Sarah's eyes softened. She recognized the careful way he spoke about his past, the same tone she used when discussing Henry's death. Some wounds were too deep for casual conversation. "Do you have family anywhere?" "Had a sister once, but she married a banker in St. Louis and decided a drifting cowboy brother wasn't good for her social standing. Can't say I blame her for that choice." Jake's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. "Been on my own so long now. I'd forgotten what it was like to have a real conversation with someone who understands what it means to lose everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the noise of the saloon fading into background as they shared something neither had expected to find tonight: understanding. Sarah felt a dangerous warmth spreading through her chest, the kind of feeling she'd trained herself not to trust anymore. Hope was a luxury that led to disappointment, and disappointment could paralyze her when her children needed her to be strong. But Jake's presence, his simple kindness, his willingness to see her as human, cracked something open inside her that she'd thought was permanently sealed. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why are you being kind to me? What do you want that you're not saying?" Jake met her eyes directly. "Maybe I see something in you that reminds me of who I used to be, before life beat the hope out of me. Maybe I think everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, especially when they're fighting as hard as you are. Or maybe I'm just a lonely man who recognizes another soul that's been carrying too much weight for too long." His honesty was like a physical blow, unexpected and devastating in its simplicity. Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time in weeks, not the bitter tears of desperation she'd grown accustomed to, but something softer, more dangerous. The tears of someone who remembered what it felt like to be valued. 3 weeks had passed since that first evening in Murphy's saloon, and Jake Anderson found himself returning each night not for whiskey or cards, but for the privilege of Sarah Mitchell's company. Their conversations had become the anchor point of his days, something to look forward to during long hours working cattle at the Morrison Ranch outside town. Tonight felt different though, charged with possibilities that neither of them had dared voice aloud. Sarah had grown comfortable enough to smile genuinely when she saw him, the professional mask slipping away to reveal glimpses of the woman she'd been before desperation shaped her choices. She still worked when other customers requested her time, but Jake had taken to paying Murphy directly for most of her evenings, claiming her company for conversations that stretched long into the night. The arrangement raised eyebrows around town, but Jake didn't care about gossip, and Sarah was grateful for any respite from the work that was slowly killing her spirit. As Sarah approached their usual table, Jake noticed the exhaustion etched deeper into her face tonight. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. The weight of her double life was crushing her, and he could see she was reaching a breaking point that terrified him. He'd grown to care for this brave woman more than he'd ever expected, and watching her fade a little more each day was tearing him apart inside. "Sarah," he said gently, "I need to tell you something important. I've been working on something for weeks now, something that could change everything for you and your children." She looked up sharply, hope and fear warring in her expression. Hope had become dangerous for Sarah, a luxury that led to devastation when it crumbled. "Jake, please don't make promises you can't keep. I can't survive another disappointment." "This isn't a promise, it's an opportunity," Jake said, his voice steady with conviction. "The Morrison Ranch where I work, they've got 3 children and the nearest school is 2 days' ride away. Mrs. Morrison has been desperately searching for someone to teach them proper reading and writing. The pay would be $40 a month, Sarah. $40, plus a house on the property for you and your children." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. $40 was more than she made in 3 months at Murphy's place. Money that would mean dignity, safety, and a future for Emma and Thomas. But the impossibility of it crashed over her immediately. "Jake, you don't understand. My reputation in this town, what I've become, no respectable family would hire someone like me to teach their children. The moment they learn where I work, where I've been." "The Morrisons aren't from around here," Jake interrupted gently. "They came from Colorado last year, and they judge people by their character, not by town gossip. I've told them about a woman I know who used to be a teacher, someone who fell on hard times, but has the education and heart for the work. Tomorrow, Mrs. Morrison is coming to town, and she wants to meet you." The room seemed to spin around Sarah as the magnitude of what Jake was offering hit her fully. He hadn't just thought about helping her, he'd actively worked to create a path out of her nightmare. This cowboy, who owed her nothing, had spent weeks arranging a future for her children that she'd never dared dream possible. "What exactly did you tell them about me?" she whispered, terrified of the answer but needing to know. Jake leaned forward, his eyes intense with sincerity. "I told them you were a widow with 2 young children, that you'd taught school back east, and that circumstances beyond your control had forced you into work beneath your dignity and education. I told them you were the most intelligent, determined, and caring woman I'd ever met, and that any family would be blessed to have you teach their children. I told them the truth about who you really are, Sarah, not what this place has forced you to become." Tears began flowing down Sarah's cheeks, months of carefully controlled emotion finally breaking free. The kindness, the respect, the genuine care in Jake's voice was more than she could process. No one had fought for her since Henry died. No one had seen her worth when she could barely see it herself. "Why?" she sobbed, her voice breaking completely. "Why would you risk your own reputation, your own standing, to help someone the whole town has written off? What could you possibly gain from this?" Jake reached across the table and took both her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "Because I've fallen in love with you, Sarah Mitchell. Not with what you do here, but with who you are. With your strength, your intelligence, your fierce love for your children. I've fallen in love with the woman who reads stories to her babies every night, who teaches Emma her letters on scraps of paper, who sacrifices everything for the people she loves." Sarah's heart stopped, then began beating so hard she was certain everyone in the saloon could hear it. Love. When was the last time someone had spoken that word to her with such reverence, such certainty? "I'm asking for the chance to court you properly, Sarah. To build something real with you and your children. To give Emma and Thomas the father they deserve and you the respect and love you've always deserved." The future Jake was painting seemed impossible, too beautiful to be real. But looking into his eyes, Sarah saw not pity or charity, but genuine devotion and unwavering commitment. She saw a man who had chosen to love her not despite her circumstances, but because of the courage she'd shown in surviving them. "When do they want to meet me?" she whispered through her tears. Jake's smile was radiant with hope and love. "Tomorrow afternoon. Mrs. Morrison will be at the general store at 2 o'clock. Sarah, this is your chance to reclaim your life, to give your children the future they deserve. Will you take it?" As Sarah nodded through her tears, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The absolute certainty that tomorrow would be the first day of a completely new life.